And welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I am Doug Keck, your host. Our guest, the one and only Purgatory lady, Susan Tassoni, the book Praying with Jesus and Faustina During Lenten and Times of Suffering. Sophia Institute Press, available, of course, through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com for all things Catholic, and also for all of Susan's other books. Great to see you, Susan. How are you?
Oh, great to be back. Only we have our first snowstorm, so it's nice to looking at Alabama, warmer state.
There you go. And hopefully by people keeping themselves out of hell, it also prevents them from falling into warmer states as well. So let me ask you, you're praying with Jesus and Faustina, and of course during Lent in a time of suffering. So, you know, we think of suffering in terms of Lent, but we've also been dealing, obviously, over the last years, you have, obviously, where you are up in Chicago, with really a massive lockdown. And have you seen that impact people in a sense of suffering?
Oh my gosh, yes, in every way. In fact, so Faustina had the same kind of experiences. Even though she lived in a convent, it's funny you mentioned suffering, because that's the whole part of my book, is how she handled suffering, how she coped with suffering, what Jesus told her about suffering. And so I wanted to be sure that what we're going through, these terrible times, these suffering times, what did she experience and how did she handle her suffering? So, right. Yes, indeed, loss of jobs. The hospitals are full with COVID. People are, in fact, I just did a show, a radio show, Doug, and the host said that this was in Louisiana, that the schools are opening, and she was very happy about that because the suicide rate for right. children are up. So, oh my gosh, absolutely. The suffering is in every way, shape, or form. Right. No matter where I go, no matter who I talk to, even speaking to a lawyer, he was telling me his wife was out of work because her job was to be, there's a Latin word he used. She was like a mediator between families and the judge when they couldn't decide who was telling the truth. They bring her in. Well, she's been out of work for a year because she's not able to visit the family. So right. that's an interesting, you don't hear these kinds right. of things, but yes, there's suffering right. everywhere, and the whole planet is suffering.
Now, the foreword you've got, participating in the sacrifice of the cross, was written by the Bishop Joseph N. Perry, who is the auxiliary up there in Chicago, who people yes. may know. Now, he wrote this, and sometimes we wonder why people are concerned about being Catholics. He says, the closer we approach to an authentic relationship with Christ, the more we encounter manifestations of trouble and hardship. Maybe that's one of the reasons people keep staying away.
Well, you have to break it down, because it would scare me too. And basically, everybody suffers, Doug. We suffer. We have our own Calvaries. We have our own passion. And Faustina suffered on a daily basis. Basically, she suffered physically like we do. She suffered emotionally. She suffered spiritually. She suffered mentally. And that's I think what that encompasses. It's not something that's grand, that, oh my gosh, I'm going to die on a cross. No, she suffered from a terminal illness, which everybody, many people go through. She had the stigmata, so she experienced the passion of Jesus. She suffered emotionally because the sisters didn't believe her. They didn't believe that, she was experiencing these visions, and they made fun of her. They insulted her. They even called her names. They called her dump. And, she was insulted, and she suffered mentally because she wasn't sure if these visions were real. Sometimes she thought she was losing her mind. So again, I think that's what he's encompassing as well.
Right. He also says here, Christian faith teaches us there is a dignity to be derived from suffering, if only because God chose human suffering as the instrument of our redemption. We live in a world that is convinced, however, that suffering is inconvenient and must be avoided at all costs.
Yes, that's interesting, because we can't avoid it. It comes our way. And what Jesus says is that, you're gonna go through suffering. It's just part of life. It's every day. There's nothing that we're going to, we can't run from it. A lot of people may run from it, but it's part of the, the human condition. And he points out to her how to cope with it. He gave her a lot of advice how to cope. And I wanted to I wanted to share with you what he said to her and what he's saying to us. He says that you please me most when you meditate on my sorrowful passion. The contemplation of my painful wounds is of great profit to you. And he's also trying to point out to us that, that he takes our sufferings and he transforms them. He transforms them actually into peace in the world, peace in our hearts, peace in our family. So there's a value to suffering. And that's what Jesus was trying to point out, what the value is and how he can take that suffering and transform people, and he can transform the world. So that runs throughout the whole book, Doug, is what the value of the suffering is and what she did and how she coped with it. And where did she turn? I can tell you right off the top of my head, she turned toward the Eucharist, because of the Eucharist, she said, that sustains her. It was the Eucharist that is, she called the bread of the strong.
Well, it's interesting, too, because you got Sister Faustina Kowalska, whose reflections on the passion and suffering you're about to read in this particular book, and this was a quote that was picked up by the auxiliary bishop. If the angels were capable of envy, they would envy us humans. For two things: one is the privilege to receive Holy Communion, kind of you were alluding to there, and the other is suffering.
The other is suffering. That's right, because Jesus said to her that it's through suffering that helps him to save souls. It's through our suffering. So we hear that term, offer it up, and there is a whole lot of truth to that, because if you offer up your, what she offered up, her terminal illness, her mental suffering, her spiritual suffering, we offer up our terminal illness, our headaches, our migraines, that there's value to it, and that he can apply that to the world. And he can also, the people, we have sufferings in our family. And so I tend to get migraines. So I give it to him to help the family. And that's what he's saying to do, because it helps him rescue souls. And he made that very, very clear to her.
Well, it says here, saints and mystics tell us, as Faustina does in these pages, that if we embrace opportunities for suffering, whether small or great, we will not regret it in the life to come. And I think that's an important thing. We lose sight of the life to come. He says, this is our consolation up front in this life. And he said, suffering stretches us. He goes on to say, we develop character while we can handle painful times, and pain in that way is a source of actual wisdom.
Exactly. He says, as I said before, he said, join your prayers, join your fast, join your sufferings, join your mortifications, join your labors to my passion. He said it has great value before the eyes of God. And then Faustina said, and these quotes that I'm giving you are all in the book, she said, I saw that my suffering shackled Satan and many souls from his clutches. And she said that her sacrifice is nothing in itself unless it's joined to the sacrifice of Jesus. So it becomes all powerful, and it has the power to appease God's wrath. And I like those terms that she used, shackling, it's snatching from his clutches. It sounds like a fairy tale, but if you can, snatch something from the devil, he's not a fairy tale. And by offering up your suffering and prayers, it helps you save countless souls. And that's what Jesus was telling her. And in fact, she got to the point where she was thanking him for suffering. There's I have this prayer in there. She says, bless, my disappointments. If I have disappointments, be blessed. If I live to a long life, be blessed. If I live a short life, be blessed. She was always praising God in joys and in sufferings. In fact, January 21st, Pope Francis talked about that, about how you should praise God. We always praise God for joys, but there's a whole background, and it's really good. If you go online, you can read the explanation where he used Francis as an example, where Francis was dying, and he didn't see any changes in the world, from his preaching, his order. They were quarreling, and he was just basically probably hopeless. But he turned around and he wrote the Canticle of the Sun, praising God. So there's a whole truth to that I thought was really interesting about what he's trying to tell us on the value of suffering.
Right, and one last quote that the bishop said, we long for contentment, we deserve such times, but somehow without the interruption brought by life's pain, we'd fail to recognize the value of that contentment. And that's one of those things too. When something is always the same, how do you know the difference?
Exactly. You don't appreciate something unless it's taken away from you. I just, it's the way, it's just human nature. We get used, we're in a pandemic, Doug, just to be able to get to the store and find, Lysol is like a can of gold. It just really heightens your appreciation for life, for the gift of life, for people. It has as Jesus says, it has a great impact on rescuing souls, and it has an impact on, he says, when you meditate on suffering and when you experience suffering, there's a distinct beauty in your soul.
Mm-hmm. Now, you, in the preface, you talk about Jesus, St. Faustina, suffering, and us, and you say, I met this amazing mystic in the 1980s on my lunch break. Explain.
I was working, and I still am, but I was in the corporate world. And then I was very fortunate, right down the street, downtown Chicago was St. Peter's in the Loop. And I would go there for Mass. Before lunch, I'd go there. And then I love to read. I'm a voracious reader, runs in our family. And so I picked up her diary, and I love diaries. Even when I was a little girl, I started with the Diary of Anne Frank, and it just caught my eye. And she was totally obscure. No one heard about the diary. I never heard about it. It was a diary, and I just took it, and that's what started my road to meeting Faustina on her canonization, which I never expected.
You talk about the book, and you said, I even marched in a Columbus Day parade raising her banner high. How so?
Well, there was a banner that said Jesus. It was bigger than me. It said, Jesus, I trust in you. Mm-hmm. And again, the rise of her popularity started just getting the devotion into the churches. Again, she wasn't even beatified. And I just happened to meet someone that, had a great devotion to Faustina. And we've been friends for over 25 years. And that started our friendship. I always wanted to walk in the Columbus Street Parade, too. So that was a benefit for me.
Now, you also mentioned here, you quote, that Jesus told Faustina, humanity will not find peace until it turns trustfully to divine mercy. Are we doing that? And if we are, how come we're not seeing the results, or are we?
Yeah, I think we're seeing both, Doug. I think we're seeing, we're seeing evil and we're seeing mercy. And just like the Passion, when Jesus was on the cross, it didn't look too good. We didn't know, we had other ideas of, the apostles had other ideas of what they expected from him, and it looked like it was over. So the point is, he wants us to focus on his passion, to understand that we're going to go through these things. And what I really liked that I just wanted to share, that's one of my favorite parts in the book, is why does he emphasize, talking about his passion? What does he emphasize? And you know what he emphasizes? He emphasizes his love. The passion is the culmination of his love. And in Faustina's constitution, one of the things that the nuns, I discovered, have to ponder on is the redemption, is, his passion that saved us. And Jesus said that, remember my passion, and if you don't believe my words, believe my wounds. He said, I came down out of love for you. He said, I created you, I lived for you, and I died for you. He said, before I made the world, my love was there for you. Even I think Pope Benedict put it forever. How do you figure that out? You were forever in his mind. There was never a time when he was not in your mind. So he's trying to emphasize his love for us through the passion. And he said, if my death hasn't convinced you, of my love for you, what will? And so that really moved me, that he asks us to meditate, to show his love, and that he is there with you. He is there in these kinds of sufferings. He's with us. He's suffering with us. So that's another thing she mentioned, that we're never alone in these things.
Now, in the introduction, you've got it by Father Joe Roche, who's a great friend of the network over the years, a great guy, has
Yes,
been
he just
on all
emailed
of
me
our
this
shows many
morning. Yeah,
times, right?
yeah.
And he talks about the timeliness of the book with the COVID. He also says our world has been living through a time of darkness, but by praying with Jesus, Mary, Saint Faustina, and the other saints in this beautiful book, we can find the light and hope of Christ. In her book, Susan leads us to discover the beauty of the sacrament of confession, which unfortunately is neglected by many. So how do you do that?
Oh yeah, I think about this all the time about Mother Angelica, and she said, Doug, I don't know if anyone ever has counted the times that she kept saying, "Go to confession, go to confession," um, and that's what Jesus said. He said, "Go to confession. It just pleases me when you don't." And he said, it's the fountain of mercy. It's the tribunal of mercy. It's the miracle of miracles, and it's through confession that we experience His mercy. So she frequented confession often. She said that she wouldn't be able to survive without confession. And here's a couple quotes. She said. She said about confession, Jesus said to her, "Every time you go to confession, immerse yourself in my mercy with great trust, so I may pour the bounty of my grace upon your soul." He said to her that it gives him great joy when we go to confession. So this was her lifeline. He calls it, as I said, he calls it the tribunal of mercy, and he wants us to frequent confession. And when we go to confession, we build peace in our lives. There's a whole, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, Doug, I think I may have it here, they did an eloquent description on confession. It's called the sacrament of conversion because it makes sacramentally present Jesus is called conversion. It's called the sacrament of forgiveness because the priest absolves us through God, the power of his ordination. It's called the sacrament of reconciliation because it imparts to the sinner the love of God who reconciles us, be reconciled to God. So when we open our hearts through sincere repentance and confession, we get an infusion of grace. It strengthens our spiritual weaknesses. In fact, every time you go to confession, it weakens those bad behaviors, those bad habits, and then it increases. It increases, and I'm going to read this. It increases the bond of our supernatural friendship with Christ. In confession, God acts on our soul the way a surgeon does as a patient in ways that we could never reproduce.
Now, you talk about here about your hopes for the book in a sense of helping people meditate with Jesus and Faustina, participate in her vision of Christ's passion, find comfort in his crucifixion. You also talk about pray the stations of the cross using the words of Jesus and Faustina. What's special about that?
Oh man, I love it. He told her, Doug, to pray the stations, and if you couldn't pray the stations, he said to her, at least because he wants her to meditate on his passion. Mother Angelica said that praying the stations increases your compassion. It increases your love. Another fan of, so he wanted her to do that. And in fact, it was her favorite devotion. She would pray the stations sometimes when in the chapel when there were no sisters, with her head down in the shape of a cross in atonement for sins. Another fan of the station, Doug, is the John Paul. Pope St. John Paul was a great fan of the stations. In fact, there's a true story, a Pope story about him, where there was a nun. It was the evening, and she was shutting the lights off, and it was the end of the evening, and she was shutting the lights off in the chapel, and she heard this rustling sound, and there was a visiting bishop that was there, and so she looked down the aisle to see if there was anybody there, and there was no one there, and she looked down another aisle, and down that aisle she saw the bishop on his knees praying the stations. And so she didn't shut the lights off in the chapel. She left them on. The next morning she went to she was at breakfast with the nuns, and she shared this experience of this bishop, not knowing that this bishop was going to be St. John Paul II. So he knew suffering, and he summed up the suffering of his people and by praying the stations of the cross. So they're very powerful. They're very powerful for my buddies, the souls in purgatory, because of the indulgences that are attached to them. So they're in fact, Doug, in the book we have this probably the main reason why I wrote the book is Father Dan Camera called me and said, can you take these stations out of your Burgundy book, because he calls my book by colors, and can you put those in a special book? I go, no, I'll do better than that, because I had it in my mind. I wanted to do this. I says, we're going to do a book for Lent on this, on the way of the cross. So I found everything about what Jesus experienced, what his passion, what Faustina had, the stigmata, what she experienced by watching his passion. So the meditations on his passion are there, and they're incorporated with the stations of the cross. So it's a powerful section. So I hope I met Father Dan's requirements of this book.
Now, it's interesting, too, because you also talk about getting a first-hand look at Purgatory. How so?
Ah, yeah. Oh, I love you. You hit the good spot. One of my favorites, yes, Purgatory. And in fact, it's during Holy Week, the first week of day of Holy Week, I talk about how she shared that the sisters appeared to her and they needed her prayers, they needed her sufferings, and they needed her sacrifice. And so she did offer them, and then they appeared back to her and said, God bless you, and basically encouraging her to keep doing what she's doing. Because why are they important, the souls in purgatory? Well, the most souls are released on Christmas Day. The next greatest souls are released at Easter. So, and I also learned that the Eastern Byzantine Rite does not celebrate All Souls Day. They celebrate All Souls Saturdays during Lent. Every Saturday is given over to the souls in purgatory. There's a liturgy for them, and they list all the people that died in the scroll of the dead, and they read those people's names, every name at the liturgy. There's an icon corner where people can pray, privately, and so the souls play a real important part during our Lent. In fact, my book, Doug, The Way of the Cross for the Holy Souls, is most popular during Lent. So they too want to share in our sacrifices and our sufferings, so they can rise with Jesus at Easter. So there's an important part about purgatory in there. I can never let go of those souls.
Now, you start off with Shrove Tuesday, and you go through and you have a format with Faustina, and then our Lord, and then a prayer, and then a kind of a meditation. I thought it was interesting because the first one you have is this. One day, this is Faustina, I saw two roads. One was broad, covered with flowers, full of joy and music, all sorts of pleasure. And people, I thought the Shrove Tuesday, it sounds like she was watching Mardi Gras in New Orleans.
Right.
And she kind of talks about the fact, and I'll jump ahead because it's long, but the idea that road led off a precipice. Yet there was also another road, which was, one that was a path that was narrow, strewn with thorns and rocks, and people who walked along it, tears in their eyes. But that one at the end ended up in the magnificent garden. So that's kind of like a version also of our Lord's description, though we tend to live in a world which tends to believe the exact opposite.
Well, we live in a world where we live in excess. People have to have the latest device. They have to have, they want to live life to the full. They want to eat whatever they want to eat. They don't, they feel like spending money on, another car when they have three other cars. There's excess. There's they eat whatever they want. And you know what? There's a cost to that. You can choose that, but there's a cost. You're going to end up overweight. You're going to end up, if you're a smoker, I'll smoke whatever I want. You could end up with lung cancer. So there's a price you pay if living the high life, if you will. If you live a life more, it's not a penance, but in moderation, as all the saints say. You don't need 12 sets of golf clubs. I knew somebody when I was working in the corporate world that had 12 sets of golf clubs. I don't know how he used them all, but you have to live in moderation. And I think that I also read that the more things you have in stuff it's high maintenance. You have to keep up with this. You have to keep up with the latest, and there's a price you pay for that. And that's why I put that there. Think about what you want to do. You make choices, and those choices can, in the long run, have a wonderful effect if you take care of yourself, if you exercise, if you eat properly, you don't overindulge, or it could have, a negative effect. You're going to, end up with diabetes or whatever. There's there's a choice you have to make between these two roads. So that was my thinking. Besides Shrove Tuesday, I thought, we're Italians. We eat on a lot of food on Shrove Tuesday, so the Mardi Gras. And I just wanted people to put that in perspective, that you have to make a decision how you want to live, because it's going to play out later on in your life.
Let me ask you one quick question just before we go. In the acknowledgments, you mentioned a name, Bert Gezi. Why did you mention Bert's name?
Because Bert he's the icon of publishing. He's extraordinarily gifted, talented. He's been on your shows many times. He was the editor with me on this book, and there's 40 years as an editor. You can't go wrong with Bert Gezi. So he's always at the top of my list when I'm writing something, and he's so very helpful, and I can't thank him enough. So he played a great role in helping me put this book together. Thank you, Uncle Bert.
Okay, and are you and Uncle Bert working on anything new?
Yeah, yes, there's something. I'm going to go back to Purgatory, Doug. It's a lot warmer there. It's too cold in Chicago. So yeah, I'm not. I think we're gonna. I have this book that I have in mind that I've been wanting to do for years and years, and I think now's the time to do it. So we're going to head back toward Purgatory.
Okay, and you stop by EWTN as well when that gets finished. Susan Tassoni, thank you so much. Praying with Jesus and Faustina during Lent and in times of suffering, available through our EWTN religious catalog, EWTNRC.com, for all things Tassoni and all things Catholic. Thank you so much, Susan, for joining us, and thank you all for being with us. We'll see you next time.